Was the second time lucky for a challenging mission to circumnavigate Tasmania on a jet ski. Known as the Ride for Pippa, two local daredevils have completed a 9-day journey raising money for the Leukaemia Foundation.
A cause for celebration. The Ride for Pippa complete, the duo now the first to circumnavigate Tasmania on jet skis.
When we got to Dover and all the jet skis were there to welcome us, man, that was awesome. You know, just the emotion behind what's been accomplished was fantastic.
Jacqueline Robson, Southern Cross News.
When Dale and I first talked about this attempt to circumnavigate Tasmania on jet skis, no one had done it before. We also looked for a local cause we could support. And not long later, only a matter of days later, a work colleague was selling biscuits in our work office made by his wife to help their niece who'd just been diagnosed with leukaemia. So we joined the dots and it was a perfect fit. In preparation for the ride, we wanted to make it a fundraising event as much as an adventure. And that's how we got to meet the Harmey family. And Pippa was the 3-year-old girl in Launceston who was diagnosed with leukaemia.
Pippa was first diagnosed with leukaemia on Christmas Eve 2015. And she'd been sick for about a week leading up. We'd had a trip to the doctor and a trip to the hospital, and they hadn't been able to diagnose what was going on. And then on Christmas Eve I took her back. She had high temperature, very sick and lethargic, and they did some blood tests and a few different tests, and pretty quickly were fairly confident that she had leukaemia. So through the night on Christmas Eve, she had blood transfusions and a bunch of different things done, and then early on Christmas Day she was flown to Hobart, and that was basically the beginning of our leukaemia journey. So we met our oncologist on Christmas Day in 2015 in Hobart, and he came in and had a long talk to us about what the next sort of couple of days and then potentially the next couple of years were going to look like, and that they were fairly confident with the initial diagnosis that she had what's called acute lymphoblastic leukemia. You know, when the doctor walks back into the room with that look on their face, it's a sickening feeling as a parent. And then I had to phone my wife to tell her what they told me, and that was the worst part. That was awful. We first met Dave and Dale around March maybe that year, I think, and they wanted to support an organisation as part of the ride for Pippa, and they asked to catch up with us for a coffee and sit down and have a talk about asking whether we would be happy to be a part of the journey. The guys already had the right idea planned of circumnavigating Tassie, and that they'd done the logistics part of what needed to be done to set it up. And then they came to us and said, how do we feel about the journey being called Ride for Pippa, and Pippa being used as part of the plan, I suppose. So that was how the whole team came together, I suppose, for Ride for Pippa.
So we connected with them, and they were happy for us to support Leukaemia Foundation in recognition of them, I suppose, and their journey. And so away we went. Okay, so Good Friday was the target date, so we were up well before dawn. We'd filled up the skis, and we'd done all that in readiness. And our road crew were our wives, Jen and Christine, and so we arranged to meet at Domain Ramp in Hobart. Southern Cross was there and quite a few supporters as we unloaded the skis in the dark and ready for the first light. And then first day was pretty exciting. Carolyn, a good friend of ours, rode with us for the first hour, and then she turned and went back. And John and I continued on down past Cape Pillar, through Tasman Passage, and then up to the first part of the east coast. When Carolyn left and John and I were then on our own, I guess there was always the uncertainty because of our first failed attempt on day 2, which was 2 years before. I'd thought about it pretty much every day since, can we actually do it? Is it biting off more than we can chew? And so there was that degree of uncertainty, because a lot of things can go wrong, which mean end of trip. So it was pretty exciting to get past the first day, go around Tasman Island and keep going up the east coast, to feel like we'd actually made a good start and we were on the journey. One of the early days was very memorable. That was day 2. We left Tribunna pretty early, and it was just like a sheet of glass heading out across the bay, past older folks and Shooting Island, and then up into Wineglass Bay. And I remember clearly that day it was like a mirror. The water was just like smooth as, and so we were going flat out, making the most of the opportunity. Every day, without fail, we had dolphins around us. They just loved the connection, and so we just maintained a stable speed, and they just come and, they couldn't get enough of it. So often they were there for 15-20 minutes. The first unsettling day was when we left Weymouth, and only the short ride to Low Head, but we encountered headwinds and 6-metre seas. And we knew they were about 6 metres because when John was standing on his ski, riding, when he was in the bottom of the trough, you could plot 2 of him above his existing height to get to the top of the wave. And our fuel consumption was terrible that day. So that sort of made it a little bit uneasy, thinking, what are we going to face on the west coast? Our first day approaching the west coast, so when we left Smithton and headed through Robbins Island Channel, down past Cape Grim, going into that first day on the west coast was always the unknown, because we've seen the swells on the west coast before. We know how big they can get, and there is a lot of uncertainty, a lot of challenges, and not many places to hide. So that was certainly a degree of uncertainty. So to get to Smithton to Bluff Hill Point on that day, even though it was only a 100k ride, it was a great feeling to actually have achieved something on the west coast. So after we left Strawn, we had a third person join us for the last 2 days, Reg from Mains Marine, and so it was great to have 3 for the loneliest corner of the state. But we had big 4.5 metre swells coming in from Africa, a lot of dolphins, a lot of other fish, a lot of bird life, and it was pretty exciting going down the west coast. But getting close to the corner where Port Davey is, Breaksea Island, and then inland to Bathurst Harbour, it's the jewel in the crown of Tasmanian scenery, and so we were just grinning our heads off when we got to those sort of places, because it is just a stunning place, and we knew that was going to be our last night before the big day, the next day, to get back to Hobart. We had a nice surprise. Carolyn, who I mentioned before, arranged a surprise welcome with a flotilla of jet skis and a couple of other boats as well, and some drone footage. And so they came down to near the fish farms off Dover and met us there, and then we all travelled up to Derwent together in formation. It was pretty special. Got to the stage when we realised we were actually going to, unless something happened at the last minute, we were actually going to do it. And it was overwhelming really to think that after all the 9 days of uncertainty, the failed attempt 2 years before, we were actually nearly there. We could look around and everyone came to support us. It was just quite remarkable how, what a feeling it was. And you know, even the hard times when John and I were alone and we were getting bashed around by the waves and the big seas and the wind, I often thought of Pippa. What we were going through was nothing compared to what she'd gone through. And that did certainly help me keep going a number of times, realising that her treatment and outcomes hadn't been so kind, and you know, it gave me the encouragement to keep going. So we got to, we crossed the finish line, I guess, the imaginary finish line, back at the same ramp we left from. And so one of the first people I contacted was David and Yvette Harmeys, just to let them know we'd actually finished it, we got it done, and more funds were coming in for Leukaemia Foundations. The fact that the treatment that Pippa had received over the last 2 years has helped her recover as well as she can, and her prognosis for the future looks pretty good. So that says a lot about the quality of the treatment, plus also the research that Leukaemia Foundation do and need to keep doing to minimise the negative impact leukaemia has for many people.
I think as far as the Ride for Pippa being completed, you know, $15,000 being raised for the Leukaemia Foundation, I look at all of the positives that come out of it. Like it's been brilliant for our family to have that support. It's great for the Leukaemia Foundation to receive that funding and the more exposure, I suppose, in the community. But I was stoked for the guys to finish the journey as well, because the story now being told is awesome for people to get an understanding of what an epic undertaking it was to go out there and do that, and for people to get an understanding of what a huge journey it was awesome.
So the adventure's over, this one is, and Pippa's on the road to recovery, but there's still a need for funds to go to Leukaemia Foundation to help families like Pippa's, and also to develop and undertake more research to overcome this insidious disease. Donations are gratefully received by Leukaemia Foundation. They're tax deductible, and the research does go to help a lot of people. Yeah.